for Election is working with the Women's Fund at the Community Foundation for Ireland over 3 years on two programmes that we call Inform. One of them is targeted at young women in universities to try to encourage them to put themselves forward for leadership positions at that really early stage in their political and leadership development. And the other programme is working with women in communities, encouraging them to engage more in their local political environment by understanding the work that their councillors do, by meeting with their councillors, and by talking about how they at community level can really influence policy locally and start to have an impact in their community through politics. So over the 3 years, those two programmes have been really core to growing the number of women engaging with Women for Election, and also in mobilising women around the country around politics and around, I suppose, public life.
Ruhama's been working with the Women's Fund with Community Foundation for Ireland for a couple of years now. We run predominantly frontline services for women and sometimes girls who are victims of exploitation through prostitution and sex trafficking. And one of our key, in fact our founding project, is an outreach service to some of the most vulnerable women who are on the streets in prostitution in Dublin. And the Community Foundation, through the Women's Fund, identified a donor who was able to support this really vital, really unique service that extends not just advice and support, but simply an outreach to some women who, from one end of the day to the next, are never in contact with anyone other than those who exploit them.
We applied to the Community Foundation for Ireland for funding to publish, launch and deliver training in our developed project called Solace Saol, which is means light in life. It's a 6-module workshop for working with women in addiction and domestic violence, and it just wouldn't have happened without the funding from your organisation. Every project is literally to the pin of their collar at the moment with all the cutbacks, so this just would not have happened without the funding.
I think it's so important to focus on women and girls in the way that the Women's Fund does, because, and I always look at things from the kind of political perspective, but women are so underrepresented at the most senior levels of political decision making, and also in business and across the board. And what we need to do, I suppose, is get more women into those kind of positions so that they can influence and that we can start to build the kind of equality that we all believe in and we all know is what we aspire to, but that we are far from achieving. And to get to that level of equality, there is a need for serious support for organisations that are working day to day in achieving that.
I think we need to be very realistic that even in Ireland, which is a developed country, the inequality between women and girls and the male population is still very real and present. And you're talking about at all levels in terms of exposure to gender-based violence, in terms of employment, in terms of representation politically, pay, on every level. And investment is vital, not at a later stage, but as early as possible. And so investing in our girls, investing in vulnerable women, empowering women in order to achieve greater equality is absolutely vital.
True feminism is about emancipation regardless of gender. And if you focus on the needs of women and girls, you also raise awareness of the needs of men and boys and children and society as a whole. Unfortunately, society is still not equal. So there is a need to focus on women and girls in particular to level the playing field.
So private philanthropic funding like that provided by the Women's Fund at the Community Foundation makes a real difference for a couple of different reasons. The first is that I suppose it lets organisations take risks and develop projects that otherwise they might not have been able to do. Government funding and project-based funding can be very limiting in that way, whereas private philanthropic funding allows organisations to innovate and develop things that then they can roll out once they've proved they've worked, but they need somebody to support them at that point to prove it. For Women for Election, the Women's Fund came on in the very early days and supported us before we had any other backers, and they recognised that actually this new organisation is a good idea, but what it needs is some financial support to get it out there and to prove that it's doing something worthwhile. And that piece of funding that we got initially from the Women's Fund has multiplied itself nearly by 100 since then. And it's so critical, I think. So there's the ability to take a risk, and the willingness to go in early, I think, is really, really important. And the other thing that is critical and has been critical to us is that funding from philanthropic sources that are trusted and recognised both nationally and internationally really helps an organisation to show to other funders that it has backers. So I know certainly from Women for Election's point of view, when we were able to go out there and tell other funders that the Women's Fund at the Community Foundation were behind us, that gave them a sense of comfort, I suppose, in coming in behind us, in knowing that they weren't alone and that they were with another trusted organisation. So I think that those kind of combination of things make private philanthropic funding so important to NGOs, and particularly at their early stages or when they're developing new projects.
It's our experience that the Women's Fund through the Community Foundation provides a unique source of funding that simply isn't replicated anywhere else. You have some state funding which has been cut radically in recent years, and also which tends not to address those innovative outreaches, education opportunities and solutions to try and empower women and girls in Ireland. So giving something to the Women's Fund allows projects, and it is civil society organisations, it is NGOs who grasp that nettle and who give their time and invest it in women and girls. It's supporting them to achieve what simply isn't funded anywhere else.
Well, as I said, the Saol Sale would not have happened without the funding. We just could not source it. We didn't have funding in our own budget for it, so that wouldn't have happened without the support. As well, as I said, most projects have lost staff members and funding as well. The fact that the application process is very simple makes it so much easier for projects as well. I mean, there's a simple application process. All the information that's needed is given, but no superfluous true requirements. So you don't have to put in 50 man hours to get an application together. So that simply made things easier as well. And as I said, we managed to publish, launch and deliver training in this project as a result of the funding we received.